You know, few things hit closer to home than our role as a dad. It's a role that when we finally look at that little baby in our arms, or our wife is holding them, or we adopt this wonderful child, we realize I have been given a responsibility. Yes, we've been given a sacred trust is what we've been given. And I want to talk to you about how to bring the best out of this opportunity and how to enjoy it along the way and how to tap into all you need to really touch this kid in a way that makes a huge difference. Now, so I want to give you, just right at the outset, kind of an overarching statement about what our job is. I think the job of a dad is to connect to the heart of your child in such a way that it makes it easier for them to connect to the heart of God. Let me say that again. The job of a dad is to connect to the heart of your child in such a way that makes it easier for them to connect to the heart of God. So that all that food, clothing, shelter thing, those are B priorities. The big priority is heart connection. And our heart connection to our kids is highly influenced by the heart connection we maintain with Jesus. And you just got to know, for everything I'm talking about here has to do with you and your relationship with God. Everything comes back from there. Now you say, but Tim, look, I am really inadequate when it comes to all this spiritual stuff with my kids. Listen, you do not have to have a degree in theology or be a biblical brainiac to adequately transfer a heart for Jesus to your kids. It all just comes back to where you lie with Jesus. And I understand why so many parents, when they feel outgunned and overwhelmed, and so they are inclined to want to subcontract or outsource all the spiritual heavy lifting to the professionals at church or whatever. It comes back to a lot of the two major ways that I see so many dads configuring their or looking at their job. I see a lot of fear-based parenting going on. I even see a lot of fear-based dads. And they say, well, look, I've never done this before. Maybe I didn't come from a very good home of origin, so I didn't get a good role model on this. Come on, Tim, there's legitimate concerns out there. We have a contaminated culture. It's all very antagonistic to our values. I agree with all that. But fear cannot be our starting point in our role as a dad, because if fear is where we're coming from, then our whole plan is going to be based to accommodate our fear. But if we're trying to transfer a heart for God to our children, that's not going to work very well, because see, if you're a follower of Jesus, you should be the last person afraid of just about anything. And I mean it. The only thing we're supposed to be afraid of are the things God meant us to be afraid of. I'm afraid to cross a busy freeway on foot. He says, that's a good fear. Don't ever do that. You'll get killed. No, there are legitimate fears out there, but there's so many things that we get so overwhelmed by, and we're letting them now control us. I love the nickname that Jesus gave himself in the book of Revelation. When he appeared to John to write out the revelation, he said, write this down, I am the Alpha and the Omega. Now that's the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet that they were speaking in. It would be like saying, I'm the A and the Z. Here's what he was saying to John, write this down. I'm the God who had the first word, and I'm the one who's going to have the last one. If you took all the pieces of advice in the Bible and put them all together, you know what God said more than anything else? He said, don't be afraid. So even though you don't feel, you know what you're doing, you feel outgunned, you feel overwhelmed, get in line. We all felt that on the front side of it, but we have a God that wants to come alongside of us and give us what we need to do this job well. It takes courage, doesn't it? My favorite definition of courage is from the late John Wayne. He says, courage is when you're scared to death, but you saddle up anyways. Man, I want to encourage you to saddle up for this job, because this is a great job. A second type of parenting I see out there is performance-based parenting. And this might be the way you were raised, where you feel like my job is to get my kids to kind of really look the spiritual part and really look the Christian part. And it's like we're following around with a spiritual report card. And we're grading them all the time. Well, you got to understand, sin management and spiritual behavioral modification is not a fun home to grow up in if you're the kid. The kids always feel like they're falling short. I want to suggest something better, and it comes straight from the heart of God. It's what I call grace-based dads. and grace-based parenting. Where did I get this from? Well, I was on a journey just like you were. When we had our first child, my wife and I, we wanted to do a good job on this. We'd never done it before. But as we were searching around for kind of an overarching theology or philosophy of parenting, we were surprised that most of the books we read came from a fear-based point of view or a performance-based point of view. But my wife is the brains of the operation. She says, but think about it, Tim. God's a parent. He's parenting us. Jesus, when he taught us to pray, he said, pray, our Father who art in heaven. The parental metaphor is the primary metaphor used of God in the Bible. So we're his children. And she says, I wonder if we could study him and his role as a parent in our lives, in the Bible, and see if we can get anything from that. And as soon as she said it, we found out that the plan for parenting was not hidden in some deep crevice in the Bible, sitting right there on the surface. And when we take and look at God's heart, the one word that defines how he's dealing with us is he's a God of grace. And what we found is if we just bring his grace, let his grace come through our life and pour out into our kids, everything changes. It creates an atmosphere of grace that our kids can grow up in. So how do we have that culture of grace? I want to help you on that. Look what it says here in the scriptures. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Whoever speaks is one who speaks oracles of God. Whoever serves is one who serves by the strength that God supplies. In order that in everything, God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. So God has called us to basically bring his way of dealing with us to center stage on how we deal with our kids. I love this one in 2 Corinthians chapter 9. It says, and God is able to make all grace abound to you so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. So this whole plan for grace-based parenting, I can summarize it in one sentence. It's simply treating your kids the way God treats you. That's all it is. And our problem in the Christian life is we tend to limit God's grace to the work of salvation. And then we go on a performance basis from there. But he says, no, this grace that I brought to the cross, this grace that I poured out on the cross for you, this love I gave you to someone who didn't deserve it, I want this now to redefine you and wash through you and become the default mode of your life. And so if we wanted to treat our kids with grace, one of the things we can do is set their hearts free, just like God does with us. I want to show you 4 things straight from God's heart, 4 things that he does with us, that if we turn around and do that with our kids, everything changes. First thing, a grace-based dad gives his kids the freedom to be different. The freedom to be different. You say, now that sounds pretty safe. Let me give you some synonyms for different so you know exactly what I'm talking about. How about weird, bizarre, strange, goofy, quirky? Grace-based dads have room for those kind of kids. Fear-based dads do not. Performance-based dads do not. Autocratic, my way or the highway type dads do not. When we're overbearing, when we want kids to be an extension of our egos, this will not happen. We don't have room for weird, bizarre, strange, goofy, quirky kids, but God welcomes them. Look, it's just natural for us to think that the best way for somebody to live their life is the way we would live our life. The best way for someone to be hardwired is the way we're hardwired. But God is a God of variety, and he gives us all kinds of kids. And our job as dads is to have room for those kids to be different. Now, I'm not saying that they're doing anything sinful. I'm not saying, they're weird. They're bizarre. I mean, you have a little boy and you put him in the backyard to play. What'll he do? He'll do a headbutt right into a tree. And you think, what are you thinking? Well, he's a little boy. They do that. You have a little girl. They're always talking to themselves. They always have invisible friends. You give them rocks. They'll make a family out of it. Kids are that way. We don't sit back and say, what the heck's wrong with you? That's just children. We celebrate them being different, weird. Suppose your son decided to come up with a new hairdo. And he went over to his friend's house and they got out this mother's hair color. He did a little blue, a little green, a little pink, a little yellow, spiked it out. And he comes back and walks in the garage and shows you his new hairdo. What if you said something like this? I don't think Jesus would be very pleased with your hair. I've actually heard parents come out with that when the hairstyles were all off the charts. I don't think Jesus would be very pleased with your hair. Isn't it interesting? When we're desperate, we pull in the biggest gun we can possibly come up with. Here's reality. I've read the whole Bible many times through. I know what God has to say about hair in the Bible. He doesn't care. He says, it's your hair. Express yourself. Do what you want. It's your hair. And some of you might want to enjoy playing with it while you can because it's going to bail on you before it's over. Now, I'm not saying that you as a dad can't have arbitrary rules on things like how your kids dress or how they cut their hair or fix it. Of course you can. You're the dad. You're the parent. You can do that arbitrarily. But we just got to be careful making moral issues out of it or making biblical issues out of it. But our children often, their differences often come at us and they embarrass us. And so we want to make a moral issue out of it when they're just being different. They're just being a little weird, or they annoy us, and you say, you need to stop that, when they're just being kids. And so kids need to know that they have the freedom to be different there. They need to know that they're in a safe place to just play out their unique personality types and so forth. You see, everything changes when we let God's grace take over. And one of the great things is it helps us dads allow our children the freedom to be different. Let me give you a second one. Grace-based dads give their kids the freedom to be vulnerable. Vulnerable. Now, this is a huge word, man. Guys, I would venture to say that very few of you are willing to risk being vulnerable. And that's why I love this 33 project, because this is the one place where you can kind of get with some other men and actually start sharing what's on your heart. Well, we want to have, we as dads, we want to create a home where our kids don't have to wear masks all over themselves and hide. They can verbalize their doubts and their fears. Their vulnerabilities can come to the surface without fear of them being attacked. Someone has described childhood as a 24-hour day, 7-day a week, 365-day a year battle to keep from being embarrassed. Our kids are very self-conscious, and they do not need to be marginalized or trivialized or ignored when they're going through. They need a tender-hearted person that understands the fragile situation they're in and help them. See, our homes need to be a safe place for our kids to work through all the dangerous and fragile stuff of their life. And as dads, we need to be the ones that lead the way on that and make sure they're safe on that. I'll give you an example. I'm going to use this, exaggerate something here. I don't think any of you men would ever be guilty of this, but let's say you had some fourth grade kid, and he's moping around the house. His mood has changed radically in the past few days, and finally, at dinner, he said, "What's into you?" And he says, "Oh, I like this girl Susie at school, and I told her on the playground, and she pushed me down and made me look stupid in front of everybody, and told me she liked some other guy, and I didn't know how to handle it. It just really hurt a lot." Now, once again, none of you men would do this, but what if this father came back and said, "You mean to tell me you've been moping around here holding this family hostage over some silly puppy love thing that doesn't even matter? You don't know anything about love. You don't know anything about dating. You can't even date till you're 16. Now listen, you better cowboy up right now. We're not going to have this bad demeanor and sad demeanor over something as silly as this." If we ever respond to our kid like that, that kid would say something like this. Note to self. Don't ever bury your heart around this man again. It's not safe. And we need to know that we can turn their vulnerabilities into strengths when we continue to voice love for them and show them affection and meaningful touch when they're going through these things. I have a friend that speaks a lot to young people, and he told me a story of a girl that she related this story to him. She had, right in the middle of her teenage years, no guy had given her the time of day. She just felt like she was as plain and as awkward and repulsive as could be. And so she decided she was going to do something about it. And she decided, look, I'm going to show these guys that I have something to offer. And she talked to this one guy at school, and she'd made a deal. She was going to rendezvous with him that Saturday night of that weekend and have sex with him. And she went up to her room, and she was scared to death about this, but she was just so desperate to know that she was acceptable. As she was going out the door, her dad was sitting there watching some TV and he looked up at her and he said, honey, you are so beautiful. You are so precious. You are such a beautiful young girl. I'll tell you, man, I just am so glad you're my daughter. And it changed everything. She turned around, went over and sat in his lap, and of course she didn't make the rendezvous. All she was longing for is to know that when she was feeling so bad about herself that somebody believes in her. Men, we have a chance to really do something different in our kids' life when it comes to helping them work through their vulnerabilities. And the way we go about it and what we say is critical. In fact, I think that this verse here, it really nails it. It says, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. Grace-based dads allow their children the freedom to be different and vulnerable. Let me give you a third one. A grace-based dad gives his kids the freedom to be candid. In other words, they need to be in an environment where they have a respectful outlet for telling us what's on their heart, even if it's something we're not excited about hearing. It might be some doubts they're going about in their spiritual life, or some weird thinking and all that they're wrestling with. This is not a time to react. And it might even be stuff they're having a problem with us. And they need to have an outlet to be able to come and talk about this and bring it out in the open in a safe way. And I get this straight from the heart of God. I said he deals with us in grace, and he gives us the same outlet. In Hebrews chapter 4, setting that verse up, it says, we don't have a high priest that doesn't understand what it's like to be in our skin. He was in all ways tempted like we are, yet without sin. And he says, so let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. But how we go about this is important. How we talk to our kids and how they talk to us is important. It says in Ephesians 4:31, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. And so in a grace-based home, we have to be able to talk about the difficult stuff in a gracious way, in a respectful way. You see, if we're just trying to control our kids, we deflate them. But when we keep them under control, everything changes. You see, we're not supposed to control our kids. Nobody wants to be controlled. We weren't designed to be controlled. God doesn't control us. He wants to keep us under control. And that's our job, is to keep our kids under control and in the process empower them. And so we have this option to give them an outlet to voice respectfully what's going on. Look at this verse here. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no bitter root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many are defiled. A situation happened with our second child, is a boy named Cody, great kid. He was in high school, and he had finished his homework. He was going to bed, and he stopped by and said, oh, Dad, I forgot to mention, I need you to sign me out of school tomorrow at noon. I said, why? What's on? He said, well, the Arizona Diamondbacks is opening season. And it's their opening game, and he said, my friend Steven's got tickets right behind the dugout, and he invited me to go. Now, you need to know something. The Arizona Diamondbacks had defeated the New York Yankees the year before in the World Series, so this is a big opening day, but for some stupid reason, I felt like I should teach my son something about personal responsibility. I said, son, you're a student, you have to go to school. You have to be there at 8, you stay till 3. He said, but Dad, they're gonna have a flyover of F-16s. Well, that's great, but and I went back to my little lecture on personal responsibility. It's like you have a job, but we can't always take off just because something fun's happening. He says, Dad, I think Randy Johnson's gonna be in the mound. And I came back to my little lecture on personal responsibility, and he said, Dad, I think Alice Cooper's gonna sing the national anthem. And you could just see this poor kid is getting so exasperated, so frustrated. And then he got real quiet. He looked at me and said, Dad, listen, I bring you home straight A's. All I've ever brought you home are straight A's. I can't bring you home any better grades than I'm bringing you. Now you need to decide whether I can go to that game. And it was like a big hand came right down out of the clouds and did one of these right in the top of my head. And it's like, what is wrong with you? Sign this boy out. And here's what's really ironic. Those straight A's weren't from his dad's side of gene pool. Those are from his mother's. I struggled in school. I worked hard for my grades, and I felt you should have vowels and consonants on your report card. So when I bring it to Dad, say, look, this one of them find a word things. I see 3. Can you sign the bottom? I mean, this is ridiculous. And here's what even more ridiculous. I would have never come to my father and asked him to sign me out. I'd have played hooky. He was showing respect to me. I took 2 large bills out of my pocket and I handed them to him. I said, Cody, make sure you buy the big hot dogs and the big drinks for you and Stephen. And Cody, please forgive me. Please forgive me for being such an idiot. You know, as we get older, the memories of youth fade. They just do. And this is an incident that could well fade from my son's memory. But if I'd have stuck to my guns and refused to sign him out, I guarantee you to the day he died, he would never forget what a bonehead he had for a father. Listen, we get it wrong sometimes. They have to have an outlet to talk with us about it. Now, I said they have to do it respectfully. The best way to make sure that they speak respectfully to us when they're voicing their frustration or disappointment with us is we speak respectfully to them when we're voicing our frustrations or disappointments with them. It changes everything. Listen, grace-based dads give their kids the freedom to be different, vulnerable, candid. One more thing. Grace-based dads give his kids the freedom to make mistakes. Chuck Swindoll said, home is where life is making up its mind. And if that's true, then it must be a place where disappointments are tolerated, hurts are endured, and mistakes never mean the end of a relationship. I love what it says here in a word. It says, my son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him, for the Lord disciplines the one he loves. He chastises every son whom he receives. So you need to know that by giving our kids the freedom to make mistakes and struggle doesn't mean that there aren't consequences. Discipline and correction and boundaries are all forms of grace. But our kids are going to struggle. They were born with a broken heart and a broken life, and we have 18 years to really embed, but they're going to struggle. It's not a time to react or to shame or to mock or to ridicule or to distance ourselves. They need to work with them through that stuff when they make mistakes. Now, where did I get these 4 things from? I got them from how Jesus deals with you and me. He gives us the freedom to be different, vulnerable, candid, and the freedom to make mistakes. It changes everything. Let me close with this quick little story. And it's just to remind you that the window of opportunity to touch your kid's life with grace is not open very long. And I was reminded of this one Saturday morning when just before dawn, it was still dark outside, my daughter Shiloh, she was about 5 years old at the time, she came in and shook me awake. And I turned over and looked and said, Dad, it's time to get up and go on our date. I'd promised her the night before I'd take her out on a breakfast date, and she'd got ready. I looked at the clock and said, honey, it's still dark outside. She said, but Dad, I did my hair for you. I picked this outfit out for you. It was so cute. And I knew where she wanted to go was open because it was a convenience store called Circle K. They're all over Arizona. They're open every day, including Christmas, 24 hours. And so I had no problem. This is going to be fun. Let's get up. So we got up and we got there right about dawn. And we went in and she picked out some donuts and some juice. I got a cup of coffee, paid for everything. And we went out and we sat on the curb on the side of the Circle K, the convenience store, to have our date. The sun was just starting to peek up. And we were right next to a dumpster, but we're over here. We're safe. We're fine. Everything's nice and clean. And I'm letting her set the agenda. And she wanted to talk about the Sleeping Beauty video we'd gotten for her. And she had been watching this thing over and over again. And she was just jabbing her way about Sleeping Beauty. And I was listening. And I asked this question, what's your favorite part? She said, Dad, I love the part at the end when the handsome prince and Sleeping Beauty danced together in a castle. I thought, well, that's my favorite part because I'd watched it with her, and I don't know what provoked me. I decided to, let's reenact it. I put everything back in the bags and lids on everything, and I picked Shiloh up there, and I started waltzing around with her, singing, I know you, I waltzed with you once upon a dream. We're coming around, and as I came around, there was a field right behind her and some brand new homes, and I could look right over, and there was a man sitting in his breakfast table, his kitchen table, and he was looking out at me, and I was looking over at him, and I thought, I could just see him. He's calling his wife right now. Quick, come here, look. There's an idiot over at the Circle K, dancing with a little girl next to a dumpster. But another thought crossed my mind. Then in a very brief period of time, some young man was going to come along and tap me on the shoulder and say, Mr. Kimmel, may I cut in? and waltzed her out of my life for good. It turned out his name was Ian. And it just seemed to go by so fast. I'm telling you, men, they're just not there long. And I know that when it comes to parenting, the days seem long, but the years are short. And so we have a chance to do something incredible during that time, create an atmosphere of grace and touch their hearts with grace by keeping our hearts connected to the God of grace.
Please remember to invite a friend or a family member to join our next episode. Contact us for more information as well as the details on becoming a partner of this program.